All right, Cowboys Nation. Today I'm coming at you with some news that's a bit of a downer, especially after the excitement we had back on Thanksgiving. Back then, it looked like the Cowboys were on track to land a compensatory fifth-round picks thanks to Rico Dowdle's departure and the way the compensatory pick system works. It seemed like a major win for the draft outlook. But now that the season is over and the official updated numbers are in, the situation has changed. And the Cowboys are no longer positioned to receive those fifth-round compensatory picks. I'm going to break down exactly what happened, why it shifted, and what this means for the Cowboys heading into the draft. Even though it's not the fifth-round picks we were hoping for, I'm still pumped about the draft because we're still looking at a Cowboys class that could feature to first-round selections, and that's huge for building the future of this team. First, let's make sure we're all on the same page about what a compensatory pick actually is. The NFL grants compensatory picks to teams that lose players in free agency, and it's a pretty specific system. If a player is cut or traded, that does not count toward compensatory pick calculations. Instead, the league looks at the net loss of free agents and then uses a formula that factors in several elements to determine what, if any, compensatory picks a team gets. The exact formula is not fully public, but the good folks at Over the Cap do a great job estimating it based on what we know. The biggest factor is the average per-year value of the contract, and then it also takes into account the percentage of snaps played, postseason awards, and other performance-based measures. Over the years, the NFL has closed loopholes like players being cut and re-signed just to manipulate the system, so the current setup is a lot cleaner. But it still comes down to those core variables. Back in November, the Cowboys were looking like they would receive compensatory picks for a number of players. The breakdown looked like this: a fifth-round pick for DeMarcus Lawrence, a fifth-round pick for Jordan Lewis, and sixth-round picks for Brandon Cooks, Chidobe Awuzie, Chuma Edoga, and Rico Dowdle. On the other side, the Cowboys were also projected to lose compensatory picks because of free agents they signed, including a sixth-round pick for Dante Fowler, and seventh-round picks for Solomon Thomas, Robert Jones, and Javonte Williams that left the Cowboys with the possibility of receiving the fifth-round compensatory picks, which would have been a massive boost to their draft capital. Rico Dowdle was initially not qualifying, but once he had a strong second half of the season, he met the threshold, and that allowed the Cowboys to avoid having to cancel out one of their other players if he had not qualified. It could have resulted in a cancellation that would have taken a fifth-round pick away, which would have been a huge blow. So what changed? The biggest shift came from Jordan Lewis's projection. According to Over the Cap's latest update, Jordan Lewis no longer qualifies as a fifth-round compensatory pick. Instead, he now projects as a sixth-round pick. And this is where the Cowboys' luck takes a hit, because the reason it dropped is simply because of the number of snaps he played. Jordan Lewis suffered a season-ending foot injury in Week 16, and earlier in the year he missed games with a neck injury, even though he had a strong year. Overall, those missed games reduced his snap count to 55.8%. That percentage is just below the cutoff for a fifth-round compensatory pick. And the difference between fifth and sixth round, according to the Over the Cap projection page, is only about 3% of snaps. So essentially, a 3% difference in snaps is what cost the Cowboys that fifth-round pick. And that's just the kind of cruel little detail that can change the entire draft picture. Now, keep in mind that these projections aren't always perfectly aligned with what the NFL ultimately decides. There is some margin for error, and sometimes the league's final calculation differs slightly from what Over the Cap has estimated. That said, this particular change is a tough pill to swallow because it's not based on anything dramatic like a contract value dropping or a player being re-signed by another team. It's simply a matter of snap count and injury, which is one of those unpredictable factors that can swing the compensatory pick system in ways that feel almost unfair. But that's the system, and the Cowboys now look like they're set to receive just one fifth-round compensatory pick instead of two, unless something changes with the final official numbers. Even with this change, there are still reasons to stay optimistic about the Cowboys' compensatory pick outlook. There are a couple of factors that could still shift the final results. One of the biggest ones involves Robert Jones, who signed a one-year deal for $3.75 million but did not play at all due to a neck injury. Over the cap's projection assumes a portion of his contract counts toward the compensatory pick formula. But there's a chance the NFL calculates it differently. The structure of the deal includes a base salary and signing bonus that were paid out, but also includes per-game roster bonuses that likely were not paid because he never played. If the league decides those bonuses shouldn't count in the calculation, that could move Robert Jones's contract just outside the qualifying range. If that happens, it would mean the compensatory pick the Cowboys were set to lose because of Jones would no longer cancel out one of their picks, potentially restoring some of the draft capital they were hoping for. Another player who was on the edge of qualifying was Cooper Rush, who did not qualify for a compensatory pick in over the cap's projection. Initially, his snap count was listed at 0, which was clearly incorrect, but it later updated to about 11%. Still, that is not enough to qualify him, the way the compensatory system works. Incentives and snap thresholds can push players over the edge, and we've seen it happen in the past where a player's incentives and playing time end up making a difference. Cooper Rush is one of those guys who could have made a difference if he had played more. But as it stands, he looks like he will not count for the Cowboys, and unfortunately, this is the kind of situation that has become almost a pattern for the team. So close, but just not quite enough to get over the threshold. So while the Cowboys are no longer in line for the 5th round compensatory picks, there is still a chance that the final official numbers could shift slightly. We won't know for sure until the compensatory picks are officially announced in March, typically right before free agency begins. Until then, the Cowboys and their fans have to wait and see whether the league's calculation will differ from over the cap's projection, and whether any of the edge cases like Robert Jones's contract will change the final outcome. Regardless of what happens, the Cowboys are still in a strong position heading into the draft with 2 first-round picks and a chance to build a roster that can compete at the highest level. And even if the compensatory pick situation ends up being less favorable than we hoped, the draft is still a huge opportunity to bring in impact players and shape the next chapter of this franchise. All right, Cowboys Nation, now let's keep rolling and dive deeper into what this all means for the Cowboys draft outlook. Because even though the compensatory pick situation is not as ideal as we hoped, the draft still has massive potential to reshape this roster. The big takeaway is that the Cowboys are still positioned to have a very significant draft class, especially with those 2 first-round picks that alone can change the trajectory of the team. But it also puts more pressure on the front office to hit on those picks and fill the roster gaps in the right way. The compensatory pick situation is disappointing, sure, but it doesn't erase the fact that the Cowboys still have a major opportunity to add high-level talent and depth in key areas. The draft is the foundation of sustainable success in the NFL, and the Cowboys are in a strong spot to capitalize on that. Let's talk about the reality of compensatory picks and why they matter. Even though they are often late-round selections, they are not meaningless. A compensatory pick in the 5th round can be the difference between drafting a player with real starting potential and having to settle for a later-round option. 5th-round picks are where you can find hidden gems, players who may have been overlooked due to scheme fit or limited exposure, but have the talent to contribute early. Losing that extra 5th-round pick may not feel like a massive blow in the moment, but when you consider the attrition that happens over a season, having more draft capital gives you more chances to find contributors. The NFL is a league where depth matters, and the Cowboys have been reminded of that in recent years. Injuries happen, and the teams that are built with depth are the ones that make it through the grind. So even though this change is frustrating, it doesn't mean the Cowboys are doomed. It just means the front office needs to be sharper with the picks they do have now. Looking at the players who are on the edge of qualifying for compensatory picks, it's worth noting how much of this comes down to luck and timing. Jordan Lewis's case is a perfect example. If he had played just a few more snaps, or if he had avoided that foot injury in Week 16, the Cowboys would likely still be on track for that 5th-round compensatory pick. That's not a knock on Jordan Lewis, it's just the harsh reality of how this system works. It's one of those things where a player can have a great season, and still the team doesn't get the draft capital they hoped for because of an injury. That was out of anyone's control, and that's why compensatory picks are so unpredictable. They can feel like a reward for losing a player, but they can also feel like a punishment for bad luck. That's why the Cowboys have to focus on the draft itself and make the most of the picks they do have. Because you can't control the compensatory system, The other factor to consider is how the Cowboys can still gain draft capital through other means. Trades, for example, are always a possibility. If the Cowboys can package picks and move up in the draft to secure a high-impact player, that could outweigh the loss of a compensatory pick. The key is flexibility. The Cowboys have to be willing to adapt to how the draft board falls if a player they love is available. They need to be ready to move and not be rigid about staying put. On the flip side, if the board falls in a way that allows them to accumulate more picks through smart trades, that could offset the loss of a compensatory selection. The draft is not just about the number of picks you have, it's about how you use them. The Cowboys have a history of making bold moves in the draft, and this year could be another chance to show that they are willing to be aggressive and proactive. Another thing to keep in mind is that the Cowboys have to address multiple areas on this roster. The defensive line, secondary, and wide receiver groups are all areas where upgrades would be beneficial, even with 2 first-round picks. The Cowboys need to make sure they are drafting players who can contribute quickly. The NFL is a win-now league, and the Cowboys are in a position where they need to build a roster that can compete immediately. That means drafting players who can step in and make an impact, not just prospects with upside who may take a year or 2 to develop. The compensatory pick situation is a reminder that every pick matters, because the Cowboys don't have unlimited opportunities to get it right. Every selection has to count, and that's why the front office's draft strategy is so crucial. Now, let's also talk about the broader implications of this situation for the Cowboys' free agency strategy. If the compensatory pick outlook ends up being less favorable, it could push the Cowboys to be more active in free agency. While the team has historically relied heavily on the draft, there are times when free agency is necessary to fill immediate needs. The key is finding the right balance between drafting and signing proven veterans. The Cowboys need players who can contribute immediately, and that sometimes means paying for experience. The challenge is doing it without compromising the team's long-term cap situation. The Cowboys have to be smart about how they allocate resources, because the salary cap is always a factor, and it can limit the team's flexibility if they make poor decisions. So even though the compensatory pick situation is disappointing, it could also be a motivator for the Cowboys to be more strategic and disciplined in free agency. But before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Your support helps us keep bringing you the latest updates on the Dallas Cowboys. Feel free to share your thoughts on the news in the comments as well. Whispers around the league are growing louder, and they all point to a simmering tension inside the Cowboys' locker room. According to sources close to this situation, star wide receiver CeeDee Lamb is increasingly frustrated with what he views as a timid, overly conservative offensive approach under coordinator Brian Schottenheimer. The language being attributed to Lamb is unusually strong, with the word cowardly circulating in private conversations to describe a scheme that, in his eyes, fails to maximize the roster's talent. The frustration is not said to be about targets or personal statistics alone. Those familiar with Lamb's thinking suggests his anger is rooted in philosophy. He reportedly believes the offense is being handcuffed by an outdated mindset that prioritizes caution over creativity, predictable play calling over aggression, and control over calculated risk. For a player who thrives on rhythm, tempo, and attacking defenses downfield, such restraint feels like a ceiling placed directly above his prime years. What makes the situation more delicate is the contractual backdrop. League insiders speculate that Lamb's camp has begun quietly signaling that patience is running thin. While no formal ultimatum has been made public, there is growing belief that the receiver's willingness to commit long-term to Dallas could hinge on a philosophical shift. The message, as it is being interpreted by observers, is simple: ambition matters, and so does trust in a system that empowers its best players within the organization. There is said to be concern that this discontent could spill beyond closed doors. Lamb is widely respected in the locker room, and his voice carries weight if the Cowboys are perceived as ignoring their offensive stars. The narrative could quickly evolve from internal disagreement to full-blown identity crisis. For now, everything remains in the realm of rumor and speculation. Yet in a league where perception often shapes reality, the idea of a franchise cornerstone questioning the courage of the playbook is enough to make executives uneasy. Whether this tension sparks change or hardens positions may define not just a contract negotiation, but the direction of the Cowboys themselves. That's it for this update. If you enjoyed the video and want to keep receiving exclusive news about the Dallas Cowboys, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. We always look forward to your comments and opinions. See you in the next video.